In the last section, we got some text to show up inside of our app bar at the top of the screen. We're now going to move on to making sure that we get a button that our users can press on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen as well. Let's first take a look at the documentation for our scaffold class and see if there's anything in there that can help us with putting this button on the screen at the proper location, specifically down here at the bottom right. So I'm going to go back over to my Flutter documentation. I've already navigated back over to the scaffold class. If you've navigated away, remember you can always search for scaffold on the top right-hand side. Once I'm at the scaffold class, I'm going to scroll down to the constructor again. So I'll go down, down, down. Here's my scaffold constructor. Right now, you and I are only making use of the named parameter of app_bar. So back inside of our code editor, we had created our scaffold, and we created an app_bar widget and assigned it to that named app_bar parameter. So now to get a button on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, we're going to create a second widget and assign it to this floating action button parameter right here. If we pass in a widget on this floating action button name parameter, the scaffold widget will automatically take that widget and display it at the bottom right-hand side, which is exactly what you and I are trying to do. Now, the other thing I want to mention here before we go away from the documentation, I'm going to scroll up just a little bit to this list of widgets right here. One of the widgets that you'll see listed is a widget called Floating Action Button. So we looked at the documentation for this, or at least this line, a couple of videos ago. This widget will display a circular button that is typically shown in the bottom right corner of the screen. So if we create a new widget called the Floating Action Button, and we assign it to that name parameter of Floating Action Button, presumably we're going to get our button at the bottom right-hand side. So let's try this out right now. I'm going to flip back over to my code editor. I'm going to find my scaffold widget, and I'm going to pass in an additional named parameter. So I'll say floating action button, and then I'm going to assign to that a widget of floating action button, like so. Okay, so right here, I want to take a quick pause just to clear up a little bit of confusion that you might have right now. There's two things about this line of code and this line of code that might be a little bit confusing right now. So the first thing you might be curious about is how are we able to make reference to something called floating action button and app_bar when we clearly have not defined those inside this file? So we are able to reference app_bar and floating action button because they were added to the scope of this file for free when we added that import statement at the top of the file. So the floating action button, the app_bar, and for that matter, material app, scaffold, and text were all imported into our application thanks to this import statement up here. That's why we are able to reference these different classes. Now the second thing you might be a little bit curious about is the distinction between this name of floating action button and the word floating action button over here. So let's clear that up as well. On the left-hand side, we wrote out floating action button with a lowercase f because we are passing that as a named parameter to the scaffold widget right here. So we were just 2 seconds ago, we were looking at the documentation for the scaffold constructor. And this documentation said, oh yeah, you can pass me a floating action button parameter. And if you do, I'll do my best to show that on the screen for you. So that's why we added in floating action button right here. Then to specify exactly what widget we wanted the scaffold to show when it tried to show something on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, we passed in the floating action button over here, which is the name of another widget that is provided to us for free by Flutter. So that's why you're seeing these kind of duplicate names right here. They don't have to be identical. It just happens that that is how Flutter decided to name these things. The one on the left is tied to the scaffold class. The one on the right is the name of a unique widget that can be used to display a button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Whew, okay. So hopefully that clears up possibly a little bit of confusion. Now you'll notice that if I hover over this green squiggly right here, I get this little warning and it says the parameter of onPress is required. So let's take a quick pause right here. We'll continue in the next section and we'll figure out exactly what that error message or what that little warning means.